Judea, in the year 132 CE. The Jewish people had been secretly planning a revolt against their Roman overlords. 60 years ago, the Romans had come to Judea and defeated the Jews in battle after battle, and then destroyed their most holy of temples, humiliating them and putting them under their boot. But the Jews have not forgotten the shame they felt while they watched their temple burn, and for decades have been planning to rise up against their oppressors, just like it says they would in their sacred texts. And at one point during this war, it does look like their dreams and hopes of a homeland of their own again, and to rebuild their temple could be realized. But at the end of this war, the Jewish people will find themselves forced from their lands, with many being sold into slavery. And it won't be until 1948, thousands of years into the future, that they will again find themselves being called to return to a land they once used to call their home. Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. In this video, I'm going to go over the third Jewish-Roman war, known as the Bar Kokhba Revolt. The reason why it has this name is because of the leader of the revolt, who went by the name Simon ben Kokhba, but during his revolt was known as Simon ben Kokhba. Sadly for us, there isn't anything really known about Simon's life before the revolt. The whole uprising itself has various different reasons for happening, and can't be really pinpointed down to a single or first cause that really started it. This war is nowhere near as well documented as the First Roman-Jewish War. But one of the major causes, though, for sure, was the fact that Hadrian, the Roman emperor at the time, was planning on building a new city over the ruins of Jerusalem called Aelia Capitolina, which would also be the home of a massive temple to Jupiter built right over the foundations of the now destroyed Jewish temple. Also, Hadrian had restricted a lot of Jewish practices that the Romans thought abhorrent, especially the practice of circumcision. So the Jewish population was already on edge, and when they heard of this new plan for their ruined city, they began to plan a revolt. Now, this uprising wasn't like the first two, where they seemed to be kind of out of the blue with little real leadership and a real end goal. This revolt was very well planned. The Jewish leadership collected weapons and supplies, and they also dug a huge amount of tunnel systems to use for guerrilla warfare against the Romans. And unlike the first two rebellions, the Jews actually came together as one group, and they didn't really have as much infighting going on at the time. And they also waited until the Emperor Hadrian had finished his little tour of his eastern provinces to launch their attack. Now, before continuing, I'd just like to mention the prophecy of the fox. There's a Jewish legend that goes like this. After the fall of Jerusalem to the Romans, and after they had destroyed the city and the temple, 4 rabbis were making their way through the crumbling city and up to the Temple Mount, where the temple once stood. And when they arrived there, they saw a wild fox coming out of what used to be the Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctuary of the former temple. Now this caused 3 of the 4 rabbis to cry, to see how far they had fallen. Now what used to be a place only the high priest could enter is now being entered by lowly wild animals. But one of the rabbis there just laughed. The other 3 were like, bro, what the fuck, man? How could you be laughing right now? Look at our city. Look at our temple. It's in ruins. That is exactly why I am laughing, said the 4th rabbi, whose name was Rabbi Akiva. Akiva said, are you all forgetting about the prophecy given to us by the prophet Uriah? Therefore, for your sake, Zion shall be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem shall become rubble, and the Temple Mount as the high places of a forest. He went on to say that he was concerned that this prophecy had not come true yet, and that he was worried that a prophecy given by an earlier prophet, that Jerusalem would yet again be filled with elderly men and women sitting in the streets, and that the city streets will be full of boys and girls playing, would never come true. But now that he's seen this, the prophecy of the fox, he's happy to know that the prophecy of Jerusalem returning to glory must be true too. And now, to this very day, people still believe in shit like this. Look here, look at this, look at this. In 2023, people saw a fox near the Wailing Wall, and the motherfuckers are out here talking about prophecies and shit still. Like, come on, people. The foxes are sneaky as hell and can live, like, anywhere. It's not a sign from God every time you see a fox in one of your special places. Like, relax, please. It's 2024. We should not be looking at natural occurrences or coincidences as signs from God, man. Come on, people. Okay, let's get back to the rebellion. In the year 132, Hadrian had left the east, and the Jewish people, after preparing in secret, were ready to launch their uprising. Very quickly, the rebellion spread throughout Judea, and the Jewish rebels under the leadership of Simon were able to capture 50 strongholds and 985 undefended villages and smaller towns. Now, I couldn't find a concrete answer if the rebels were actually able to capture Jerusalem itself. It is debated amongst historians if they did or didn't. But they did mint coins that had the freedom of Jerusalem engraved on them. And for all intents and purposes, Simon was able to establish a Jewish government over quite a large geographic area for a good 2 years, taking the title Nasi Israel, the Prince of Israel, and being given the name Bar Kokhba, meaning son of a star, by the religious leader of the revolt, the rabbi from earlier who reminded the other rabbis about the prophecy, Rabbi Akiva. Now, there were 2 legions in Judea when the revolt broke out, the 10th Legio Fretensis and the 6th Legio Ferrata, aka the 10th Legion of the Straight and the 6th Ironclad Legion. That's fucking badass. But it's proposed that Simon had around 400,000 men under his command, so clearly 2 legions was not going to be enough to put down the rebellion. Gaius Publicius Marcellus, the Roman legate of Syria, came to Judea with Legio III Gallica, the 3rd Gallic Legion, and the Roman governor of Arabia, Titus Haterius Nepos, brought Legio III Cyrenaica. There's also a theory out there that Legio 22 Dio Tariana was called on from Arabia as well, but along the way they were ambushed and massacred, causing the legion to be disbanded. This legion was actually not raised by a Roman general or the state. It was raised by Diodorus, king of the Celtic tribe of the Tolistobogai, all the way back in 48 BC. The king was a client and ally of the Roman general Pompey the Great. And this legion, it had helped the Romans win the Third Mithridatic War, and had also taken part in the First Jewish Rebellion. But sadly, sometime during this war, they disappear, never to be heard from again in history. While these legions and their commanders slowly made their way through the country, the Jewish rebels, they relied heavily on hit-and-run tactics, and pretty small but lethal ambushes to try and disrupt the progress of the legions. The Jews, they had built a massive amount of tunnels, which they would use to transport not only soldiers, but also goods to keep them and the Jewish refugees of the war fed and clothed. These tunnel systems were said to have gone into almost every house in the lands controlled by Simon. And as of today, there has been at least 350 different hideouts and tunnel systems excavated, and they were mapped out into 140 different Jewish villages. You know, it's even possible that maybe at this time, this is possibly the time that the caves that the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in were made, and possibly even inhabited, but we'll never know. Now, I have gone on to 11 different historical sites here and looked everywhere else I could think to try and find something about what actually happened during these times. But sadly, unlike the first Jewish-Roman War, which had Josephus writing down and taking account of everything that happened, the Bar Kokhba Revolt did not have an ancient historian there to compile all of the events of the war together, so there's not really much to go on. But we do know that it was going well for Simon and his rebels, so well for them that the Roman Emperor Hadrian had to call upon his best general, Sextus Julius Severus, who was stationed all the way over on the island of Britannia. So we can assume that the Jewish rebels, they were doing well enough in this war and causing enough casualties on the Roman side that Hadrian called on a man that was basically like halfway across the world. I mean, at this point, across the whole world, to come and put down the revolt. Now, as Severus is making his way to Judea from Britain, the Romans were bringing in troops from as far away as the Danube legions to come put down this revolt. It's believed that up to 10 different legions, or at least portions of these legions, fought in this war. We've already mentioned a couple here, but there was also Legio II Traiana Fortis, Legio X Gemina, cohorts of the 5th Legio Macedonica, cohorts of the 11th Legio Claudia, cohorts of the 12th Legio Fulminata, and more cohorts of the 4th Legio Flavia Felix, along with 30 to 50 auxiliary units for a force probably about 60, a big gap here, but 60 to 120,000 Roman soldiers. So that is a massive force, even on the lowest of the low ends. I mean, this was a much, much larger force than the one that was in Judea under the command of Titus 60 years earlier in the first revolt. And it's also theorized that the infamous 9th Legio Hispania, the 9th Spanish Legion, they were brought to Judea by Severus, and that this is where they too disappeared from history, like the Dioteriana Legion from earlier. Just a theory, though. But I don't know. I'm pretty sure the 9th was attacked by the Seal people, and then 20 years later, Channing Tatum went on a quest to reclaim the lost eagle and restore honor to his family name, which in the end he did, and found out that the Legion was destroyed, except for a few survivors, and then those men helped defend the eagle one last time, so Channing could bring it back home safe and restore his family honor. Pretty sure that's what happened. In the year 134, Severus landed in Judea and began his slow, steady, and brutal campaign of conquest. His plan was to go to, besiege, and then take every stronghold held by the Jews and to destroy every little place that they could find refuge in. The Romans are said to have demolished 50 different fortified towns and 985 separate villages, exactly the amount the Jews had taken. A quote from Cassius Dio says, 50 of their most important outposts and 985 of their most famous villages were razed to the ground. 580,000 men were slain in the various raids and battles, and the number of those that perished by famine, disease, and fire was past finding out. Nearly the whole of Judea was made desolate. It wasn't all sunshine, rainbows, and slaughtering for the Romans, though. When writing back to the Senate on the ongoing events, Hadrian left out the customary greeting that all emperors that had come before him used. I and my army are well. He simply put, I am well. The Romans, they were winning the war, but it was costing them enormous efforts and loss of life. The final large battle of the war was the Siege of Bethar, which was Simon's main stronghold that was placed quite nicely on a mountain ridge. Again, there is no first-hand accounts, or really any accounts, of the actual siege and then the fighting once the Romans broke in. But it is known from an inscription found near the fortress that the 5th Macedonian Legion, as well as Claudius's 11th Legion, took part in the siege. And we also know that it was a bloody mess once the Romans finally broke in. Jewish sources have the Romans going absolutely berserk, smashing babies against rocks and killing every single person they found, wrapping up Jewish scholars in their scrolls and burning them alive. You know, the typical ancient siege warfare type stuff. The Romans weren't finished with the Jews yet. After losing Bethar, Simon, who is presumed to have died in the fighting, the Jews had no defenses against the Romans. Their leadership was destroyed. All the members of the government Simon had set up were captured and executed, with some of them apparently being flayed alive, including Rabbi Akiva. The Roman military, the Roman military forces, they also just went on a sweeping campaign of destruction and pillaging. They pretty much shot out every little village left standing in the region and continued going after the refugees until all of them were either caught or killed. Anyone that was left in the region of Judea when the Romans were done with their bloodlust was forced to leave their homes and land if they were lucky. Many people were sold into slavery, with some sources saying up to 100,000 Jews or more were made slaves. And they were being sold for the price of about one ration food per horse. The Emperor Hadrian, he forbade the practice of Torah law, and using the Hebrew calendar in Judea, and he also ordered the execution of any Judaic scholars that the Romans could get their hands on, and burned the sacred scrolls of the Jews. He burned many of these scrolls at the new temple, dedicated to Jupiter, that he built right on top of the Temple Mount, where the former Jewish temple once stood. And to really try and destroy any vestiges of Judea or ancient Israel, Hadrian renamed the entire province of Judea to Syria Palestinia, in hopes that by doing so, over time people would forget about Israel and the Jews, and that they would be forgotten. But we know, sitting here today, 2,000 years later, that that won't be the case. That the Jewish people, they will survive, and they will continue to go on through multiple attempts to eradicate them. I mean, if anything, you've got to give them some respect for just never giving up and letting go of this identity that was created, and then I guess forged in fire time and time again. But sadly, nowadays, though, I think many of the Jewish people have forgotten where they came from and what their ancestors had to go through. A much stronger country, much more wealthy, came to their land and began to take over, and when the Jews didn't like it, they fought back. But each time found themselves being beaten and pushed from their villages with their families and their entire lives uprooted. And those were the lucky ones. The rest were either enslaved or killed. I mean, they never really stood a chance. And I wonder what the Jews who were living after the revolt was crushed, what they were thinking. Maybe something along the lines of one day, somehow, some fucking way, we'll be back. And we'll take our home back. I wonder if they could have ever imagined the death and despair that their descendants would end up causing to others. The same kind that they had to endure themselves. Do you think that they would just say, yeah, F that, we're just going to let this whole Judaism thing go? Like, we believe in all that and it's all good for us, but maybe God wouldn't want us to be committing heinous acts of war against our fellow human beings over some fucking desert land. And now, of course, it's not all Jewish people's fault. I almost started sounding a little anti-Semitic there, didn't I? No, I'm not dumb. And I don't think one side is good and one side is evil. I think that there is two groups of people using religion, biased history, propaganda, and other countries' media to try and further their own goals and ideologies, as well as to continuously make a conflict so that the world, kind of continues to give shit about some backwater desert town in a country that provides nothing to the world except hate and violence. They do this because it keeps them in their privileged positions of power and wealth. And as long as they and their families and friends are good, then nothing else matters. Not even their own people. Not even little children being blown up in the street. And that goes for both sides. Sorry, what? I had to clear my throat there. What was I saying? Yes. Hadrian expelled the Jews from Judea, and he renamed the province to Syria Palestinia in the year 134, and not up until the year 1948, when the vote for a new Jewish homeland was held, would the Jews officially call this land their home again. I really wish there was more historical info on this war, because it seems like it was one of, if not the bloodiest wars the Romans ever fought. I mean, they had plenty of uprisings before, and had plenty of losses to other peoples, but never did the Romans try and erase the existence of a people like they did here, so the losses must have been absolutely enormous. But that is all I've got for this video. I hope you enjoyed listening, or watching, whichever one you do. Thank you very much for that, and yeah, see you later. Have a good one.